Europa FM, pe aceeași frecvență cu tine.
Bun găsit tuturor! Ne întâlnim, oameni buni, pentru a face o semnalare și pentru a prezenta ceea ce cred eu că este evenimentul editorial al acestei toamne în România. Este vorba de apariția unei cărți despre care cred că va face senzație și că îi va impresiona pe foarte mulți dintre voi. Cartea se numește Între, două, lumi și este scrisă de Suleika Jaouad. Ea este o tânără care se îmbolnăvește de leucemie cu mulți ani în urmă și își descrie întreaga suferință într-o carte care te ține cu sufletul la gură. Cartea ei a impresionat milioane de oameni din întreaga lume, milioane de americani. Este una dintre cărțile bestseller ale The New York Times. De asemenea, ea a scris pentru această publicație de-a lungul timpului și i-a ținut la curent pe oameni cu modul în care decurge tratamentul său, povestea sa fiind inspirațională pentru foarte, foarte multă lume. De-alminte, rubrica sa din New York Times este premiată și cu un premiu Emmy, dar a scris și pentru publicații precum The Atlantic, The Guardian, sau pentru radioul public american. Așadar, o vom cunoaște pe Suleika și vom vedea și o să vedeți și voi de ce această carte este importantă chiar și pentru România. Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Nice to meet you, Suleika. This is my opinion about your book, but how would you describe it?
I think the reality is that we all have life interruptions, be it an interruption caused by illness or some other kind of loss or heartbreak. That's what comes with the territory of being human. And I've been interested in the concept of interruptions from the time that I started writing. And so my hope really is that this book, which to me feels like a story of survival and examines the question of what we do when our lives are upended. What do we do with these interruptions? How do we move forward from them? How do we learn from them? What do they tell us about ourselves? My hope is that this book will be a friend, not just to people who have been sick or who have had a loved one who's gotten sick, but really for all of us, especially in this time of global uncertainty.
So it's not a book about you, but it's a book for the rest of the people.
Yes, yeah, I really wrote the book that I wish I could have read when I was sick and recovering from cancer. I think it's one of, we live in a culture that's focused on a kind of relentless positivity, which can be empowering. But I also think it can make it difficult to give ink and to speak the unvarnished truth of what it means to be in the midst of a reckoning like this, and both the ways in which it can open your eyes and teach you, but also the ways in which it can be just incredibly difficult and isolating. And I wanted to write something as honest and as authentic as I possibly could. When I was working on the book, I had a note above my desk that said, if you want to write a good book, write what you don't want others to know about you. If you want to write a great book, write what you don't want to know about yourself. So that was my kind of guiding North Star in the creative process of writing this book.
Tell me, what is the most common thing you have heard about your book? The thing the people are telling you every time they are reading it?
It's such a good question. I think the piece that seems to strike people isn't about the cancer treatment itself, but what happened after. So often when we talk about illness, we focus on a cure as being the kind of final chapter. But in my experience and the experience of so many readers I've heard from, the hard work of healing doesn't end with the end of cancer treatment. It's where it begins. And so that question of what do we do after? What happens in that aftermath is something I think that's misunderstood and overlooked. And that was really my hope in writing this book, was to shed light on what it means to have survived, and to shift the focus to include that piece that's really anchored in recovery and reentry.
Actually, your journey, I don't want to do spoilers, but the book ends with the fantastic journey, and it's a very good piece of literature. And I was amazed about your thoughts, and I was amazed by the thing. I never thought that the process to come alive was so hard and so difficult for you and for so many people. And my question is, are you still affected by this process of healing, actually?
Yeah, I don't think, healing happens in a linear fashion, and I don't think it has an endpoint. I'm always healing. I'm still understanding my illness in new ways and applying that knowledge to my current life. And I think, as much as we like for experiences to have a clear beginning and a clear end, that's just not life. We're always grappling with things from our past. And I think one of the big realizations I came to in the book, and on that very long literal journey that I took in a car with my dog across the United States, is that we don't get to move on from the most painful parts of our past. We can't put them in a box and, stow them behind us. Instead, we have to learn to move forward with these experiences, with our past, and to integrate them into our present. Ernest Hemingway, the author, has this line where he says, "The world breaks us and we are stronger in the broken places." And while I agree with that, I also think there's often a gap between the epiphanies that arise, say, in the midst of an illness, and the application of those epiphanies. So lots of people, deal with illness or some kind of loss, and they have a kind of renewed awareness of what is meaningful to them, or what aspects of their life no longer fit. But then you have to apply that knowledge and live into its possibilities. So for me, that is my endless work. That is the ongoing part of the healing process.
You lost so many people in this process, so many friends of you. I think you miss them all the time, which is very normal. But also you write with such love about their parents, about their families, about the people who are beside. Do you keep in touch with these families or with these people?
I do keep in touch with them. I think when we talk about cancer, we often focus on the patient, on the person who's diagnosed with it. But really it affects your entire community. It affects your family, your loved ones. And so the parents of the friends I lost and that I wrote about in the book, I still keep in touch with them. The strangers I ended up going to visit on my long road trip when I was recovering from treatment, I still keep in touch with them. I've gone to visit them since then. And to me, one of the strange, beautiful byproducts of being sick is that I got to meet all kinds of people whom I otherwise never would have crossed paths with. And that's a gift I don't take lightly. The strange connections and unexpected friendships that emerge in these moments. I think they really make you realize how necessary it is to have community. And I think it's made me understand the importance of friendship and of family on a whole new level.
You wrote a piece of love and great writing about your friends Melissa's parents. Are they well today? How are they?
They are doing well. I think losing a child is an unspeakable form of heartbreak. There's, we have a word for children who have lost their parents, which is orphans. We have a word for someone who's lost a spouse, which is widow, but there is no word for when you are a parent who's lost a child. It's one of those experiences that really feels like a breach of contract with the natural order of things. And I don't know that the grief gets better, so to speak, with time. I think it changes in its intensity. But they are doing well. They have grandkids now. They are living their life as fully as they can while also carrying the great loss of Melissa.
You received a small object from them, as I remember. I didn't note it down, but you put it on your keys, on your car keys, and you said you're gonna keep them for all the time. Do you still have it?
I still have it. I still have it on my keychain. Melissa was someone who collected all kinds of knickknacks, and she had a collection of antique keys. And so it's one of my treasured possessions, along with her paintings.
It was my impression, Suleika, that when you wrote this book, you wrote it mainly for this kind of families and for this kind of people. Even it's a book about you. Am I right about this?
I wrote it certainly for the people who have lived this experience, but I also wrote it for the people who haven't. I think I learned so much about myself when I got sick. There's a way in which confronting your mortality has a sort of centering, clarifying power. It reshuffles all of your priorities. It makes clear what really matters. But I also believe, that it shouldn't take an illness to reflect on the deeper questions. The facts are that, life is a terminal condition for all of us, and we're uncomfortable talking about mortality, and it's something we like to ignore, but that's that's what it means to be human. And so my hope was that this would be a comfort and a companion to people who had these experiences directly themselves, but that it might also prompt those who've never been sick to reflect on some of these questions and to think about how it applies in their own life. So really, I wrote it for everyone.
When you started the road to healing, you were given 35% to be alive. You said earlier that is about confronting your mortality, but how is it really for you or for people to think about death when they are so young, because you are only 22 at that time?
I think it was at first, of course, terrifying and devastating. And what came up for me was this sense of not having really contributed anything to the world that I was proud of. At 22, I had been preparing for an adult's life. I'd gone to college. I worked very hard to set myself up for the possibility of having the kind of career I wanted to have, or even just the time to explore and to travel and to figure out who I was. But with that 35% chance of long-term survival came an understanding that time is not infinite. We don't have endless time. And that if there are things that you want to do or people you want to spend time with, you have to do them now. And in a strange way, that was really motivating for me. For example, writing is something I've always loved to do. And prior to my diagnosis, I would have been grateful for an internship or a fact-checking position. But in the midst of treatment and knowing that I likely wasn't going to survive, I didn't have time for internships. I didn't have the health to go to an office from 9 to 5 every day. And so instead of feeling like I needed permission or I needed certain degrees, I just started doing the thing I wanted to do, which was writing. And I think about that all the time now, because of course, I don't have as heightened of an awareness of my mortality as I did then, nor should we, right? If we all lived every day as if it were our last day, we would all probably make a bunch of very risky decisions and become bankrupt. So that's not what I'm saying. But I do think that acknowledging our mortality, our collective mortality, and having an awareness of time can help us locate the things that we want to do and start doing them, because life is short and we have to get going.
You are also famous, Suleika Jaouad, for your TED Talk, which is seen by millions of people. Also for your column from New York Times. And I think because of this, lots of people are coming to you to see you. Lots of sick or ill people, people who need help and guidance and light from you. What do you feel today when you meet, and I think you meet lots of ill people? What's in your mind and in your soul? Knowing that not everyone has a chance to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that an experience like this brings you closer to your humanity, your own humanity, and certainly to the humanity of others. I feel like, especially in America, we talk about the importance of having tough skin, of being stoic, of, being invulnerable. And I think the really beautiful thing about the work that I've done and in being so vulnerable about my own experiences is that it's created a reverberation. There's a way in which vulnerability begets vulnerability begets vulnerability. So now when I meet someone, instead of the usual superficial chit chat, what do you do? Do you have children? We go straight to the meat of the conversation. And I'm of the opinion that we shouldn't have tough skin. We should have tender skin. We should meet each other with our vulnerabilities, because when we do, we learn again and again that we're more alike than we are different.
Yeah, I see. But I think the people are coming to you for hope. Yeah. You should give them every time. So
I've never been interested in being a kind of mountaintop sage. I'm not interested in giving people advice. What I can do is share with them my own story, share with them what I've learned, share my own struggles. And if there are themes or elements of that apply to their own life, then wonderful. But I don't think you can give someone hope. I think you can live your life and share it as honestly as possible, with the hope that it invites people to reflect on their own lives. Yeah.
Most of us believe that after suffering, life is better, that you enjoy it more, that you feel more, and that you have stronger experiences. And there is a saying, after the storm, there will be sun, and so on. Is it life like this, truly?
Yeah. So, that kind of heroic survivor's journey that we get bombarded with in movies or on social media, I think is actually really dangerous. There's, a saying that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think, even if those sayings come from a good place, and even if, people want it to be over, it's not over. I think in some ways, we skip over the challenges of reentry, and we don't talk about things like post-traumatic stress disorder, or the long-term impact of an illness on the body, on the mind, on a family unit. And I think in not talking about it, we end up alienating those who are in that liminal space, where they're maybe better on paper, but off paper, struggling to figure out who they are or how they're going to work when they're still, dealing with physical limitations, or just grappling with anxiety or depression. And so I think we need to first understand that there are very real challenges that come with recovery. It isn't, massages and manicures. It's, as much as, the word recovery might suggest otherwise, it's not about salvaging the old. You can't return to the person you were before a diagnosis, but it's a kind of act of sometimes terrifying discovery. And so that was my aim in writing this book, was chronicling the challenges of recovery, but also chronicling the process of something called post-traumatic growth, which is this notion that when you go through a trauma, there are things that you can learn about yourself along the way that actually enhance your life and do end up making you stronger. But that's a choice.
You worked for a while for Barack Obama's presidential cancer panel. What is, in your opinion, the best advice or the best idea you gave it in that panel?
Mm-hmm. So we talked about so many things. The cost of cancer, which at least in the United States can be extremely high, even if you have good health insurance. We talked about access to clinical trials. I am alive today because of an experimental clinical trial. The standard chemotherapy treatments didn't work for me. But I think, the biggest piece of advice that I came up with that I wish had been present, is that you can't just think of cancer as an acute diagnosis that affects the body. It affects the whole individual. And we need, in addition to, being focused on curing the cancer, we need to be focused on treating the whole patient. And in order to do that, we have to understand who that individual patient is. Because what happens in the hospital, I believe, is just as crucial to someone's recovery as what happens outside of the hospital, what happens in the home. Does that patient have a caregiver who is driving them to and from the hospital? Who is helping them get groceries when they're not well enough to get groceries? And so I'm really interested in figuring out how we can treat the whole patient to make sure they're not just physically well, but emotionally well. Because as I often felt when I was at my sickest, was this, if it's not to live a good life and a happy life and a meaningful life, then what's the point of going through all of this? And I think too often, as soon as a patient is cured, they leave the medical system. There's not follow-up. There isn't any sort of protocols or discharge instructions or support to actually help them live into the fullest possibilities afforded by their remission.
We are going to end this interview, and I will thank you very much for your contribution, and I will thank you for your book, which is here in Romania. The general public will see it in November, I think, and I think it will be a huge event. But I wanted to ask you, do you still read it from time to time? Do you revisit it?
I actually don't. I think I read it many times, of course, when I was still working on it. But the book no longer belongs to me. It belongs to the readers. It's almost like sending a child off to college, in that I'm here to help guide it and to help it, find its way. But I don't reread it, and I don't even really feel a sense of ownership around it. The people who read it will have their own takeaways, their own interpretations, their own relationship to it. And there's something kind of beautiful in that surrendering.
Thank you very much once again. I hope someday you'll come to Europe, maybe to Romania. And thank you once again for your beautiful writing and for your talent also.
Thank you so much. This has been a true honor. And I also do hope to come to Romania someday.
We hope to see you. Thank you once again, Suleika.
Europa FM, pe aceeași frecvență cu tine.